On behalf of the Distinguished Chair for Gender and Development, MSSRF, I welcome you all to this discussion on land rights for women farmers. I request respected professor and our panelists for the day, our lead speaker, Srimati Lalita Kumar Mangalam, Chairperson, National Commission for Women, Dr. Rukmini Rao, Founder, Gramya Resource Center for Women, and Ms. Geeta Ramaseshan, Senior Advocate and friend of the Foundation, to please take their places on the center stage. This event is being recorded and streamed live online for enabling more people to be able to participate in this discussion. To set a very brief context, the struggle of women related to securing land rights is one that assumes greater significance in the present context, with outbound migration of men from rural areas and the unfortunate incidents of farmer suicides, with latest reports saying there's an increase by 40% in farmer suicides over last year in the Maharashtra region. This leaves the woman more at risk, having to fend for her family without the security or the means to provide for them. It was in order to engender the entire approach towards agriculture that Professor Swaminathan took efforts to introduce a bill as Rajya Sabha member, named the Women Farmers Entitlements Bill. This material has also been made available to you in the form of a booklet for enabling greater understanding and reading about the event and the background in which we are holding it. It is important at this juncture to look back, to move ahead, as we have called it, in the context of empowering women. To start the proceedings formally, I request our Executive Director, Dr. Ajay Parida, to welcome the gathering. Dr. Rangalakshmi, to welcome our guests for the day.
A very good morning to all of you. Professor Swaminathan, the Chairperson of the National Commission of Women, Srimati Lalita Kumar Mangalam, our distinguished panelists for today, Dr. Rukmini Rao and Geeta Ramaseshan, Mrs. Swaminathan, the distinguished Chair for Gender and Development at MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, our trustee, Dr. Vinu Aran, my colleagues at the Swaminathan Research Foundation, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, representatives from the media. On behalf of the trustees, staff and scholars of the foundation, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this, a timely discussion on women's land right or land rights for women. I think all of you know that the land is now the burning topic in the country. We are extremely grateful to Dr. Srimati Lalita Kumar Mangalam for finding time. Madam, I welcome you. I think this is your second visit to the foundation. Last time when you came along with your colleague, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, you had known the activities of the foundation. And we look forward. I think you have been a popular face in the news channels, very articulate, speaking. I mean, you're a regular feature in the news channels. We also welcome Dr. Rukmini Rao, but Madam, on behalf of all of us, let me also congratulate you for receiving the Femina Social Impact Award. After receiving the award, she is directly coming from Bombay. And she has been an advocate of women's rights and ownership issues. I'm sure we'll not get a better person than you to be a part of this panel discussion. My special welcome to Ms. Geeta Ramaseshan, a close friend of the foundation, which all of you, our foundation colleagues, knows her. She has been helping the foundation. She has helped the foundation in establishing a gender code for the foundation. And we welcome you, ma'am, on behalf of the foundation. Well, the context, I think, Jayashree has briefly touched, and also Mr. Swaminathan is going to deal with it in detail. I'm not going to preempt what she is going to speak, but giving the context, MSSRF, since its inception, as you could see that we have the mission called Pro-Nature, Pro-Poor, and Pro-Women Orientation to Technology Development and Dissemination. Our work has been participatory. We work with the communities, and our work is essentially focused on the research, action, and policy interventions. Over the last 27 years, we have been relentlessly working with the several communities, specifically focusing on the empowerment of the women at the grassroots level. Whether it is in far-flung areas of Wayanad in Kerala, or Jaipur in Orissa, or Vidarbha in Maharashtra, or even many parts of the Pondicherry and Tamil Nadu. In all our interventions, women's empowerment has been a key process in establishing whatever the research and development process we do. And this has been exemplified by establishing working with so many community groups, whether it is self-help groups for women or graduating them into what you call the federations. We have two existing women federations, whether it is a Kuluvai Federation in Kanibadi or the Inur Grama Sangam, which has more than 3,000 women members in each of these federations. Similarly, our recognizing the contribution of these rural women in various activities which they are doing, our National Virtual Academy for Rural Prosperity has recognized more than 600 rural women by inducting them as fellows of our academy. They are repositories of knowledge and information which benefit the community at large. And this empowerment process also continues in the sense that many of the rural women has represented their community in various national and international fora. For example, Kamala Pujari from Jaipur, she traveled all the way to Johannesburg to receive the Equator Initiative Award for the seminal contribution they have done in conservation of natural resources or biodiversity in particular. Same as the case with Usha Rani or Kasturi from Pondicherry, who represented the communities at Tunis, the World Conference on Information Technology, for the role they have played in the information and communication system. Similarly, Vidya and Geeta from Kanivadi region, they have also represented their community in Alexandria in the Youth Empowerment Summit. So all these things goes on to say that MSSRF's major focus has been empowering the women for improving their lives and livelihoods or contributing to natural resource management. And I'm also happy to mention that during 2012, MSSRF has received the award for empowerment of women, National Award for Empowerment of Women using science and technology. So while we are doing all these things, but our focus has been on the farming and fisher communities all around the country. And today's discussion, which going to talk about the land rights for the women, is a very crucial and very important step for ensuring the livelihood and, more importantly, sustainability of the farming system in the country. I'm sure Mrs. Swaminathan and Professor will explain the purpose and the details of this. And Madam Kumara Mangalamji, who are as chairperson of the National Commission of Women, we are expecting your active support, active encouragement to a cause which will sustain the farming in the country. We look forward to your help, support, and kindness. With this, I welcome once again all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for setting in context the work of MSSRF, specifically in relation to a pro-gender, pro-women approach. I now request Mrs. Meena Swaminathan, our Distinguished Chair for Gender and Development, MSSRF, to give an introduction to the program, giving us a background to the discussion and also to the event, telling us how we would be moving on ahead. She has been putting in a lot of thought and effort towards this, and I do hope she would be able to take us all together as part of this process.
Let me welcome you all once more on my personal behalf. I'm very happy to see you all here, and especially the three resource persons. On a personal note, I would like to say I'm especially happy to see Lalita Kumaramangal because she happens also to be the classmate of one of my daughters. And I feel so proud that a young person of my children's generation is now at the helm of affairs. She is one of the leaders who is going to take the country forward, because the role of the older generation is over. And now we are looking forward to the younger generation to take India forward on its march. Now, why this discussion and why today? Now, why today is very easy to answer. We wanted to do it for Women's Day. And on Women's Day, the date was not convenient for our speakers, and so we decided to have it today. And why this discussion? I think our ED has already given you a brief account of the fact that MSSRF has been working with rural women for the last 25 years. And I want to give you the facts. Today, women contribute 80% of the agricultural output in this country. 80% of the work in agriculture is done by women. Of course, that includes both women paid labor and women farmers. Women only own 13% of the land. So only 13% of women can be called owners of land, but they contribute 78% of the work, and 75% of all rural women are engaged in agriculture. That is the main occupation of 75%. Now, these women who work on their own land, their family land, they are not called farmers, because in India only the person who has the patta, which is usually a man, as I said, only 13% have the patta. So it is linked to patta, but actual work is done by the women. And I am sorry to tell you that they are called, in our statistics, unpaid family labor. It is recognized that they are unpaid. It is recognized that they are family labor members. So they have to do the labor. They don't need recognition. They don't need payment. That is the attitude. Now, why are we asking for women's entitlements? Not just because they are doing the work, but because if they don't have title to the land, there are many things that they cannot get. First of all, they cannot get credit, because bank credit, which is called Kisan Credit Card, goes only if you can show your patta, and they can't show their patta. Now, without credit, you can't get the 4 major inputs that you need for agriculture, that is water, fertilizer, tools and implements, and marketing. These 4 things you can get only if you have some credit, because you have to work for it. And finally, women farmers do not get the support of the agricultural extension services. That is, they do not get the technology. When the extension department goes to the village, they always look for the men, and they communicate the technology to the men, though the women may be actually doing the work. The man might have migrated, he might be sitting in Gulf, he might be sitting in the town, he might be sitting anywhere, but they look for only the men and give only them the technology. Today, in the newspapers, because of the land movement, every day we are seeing pictures of farmers marching, all wearing turbans. All the men are marching while the women are doing the work. Now, in 2008, MSSRF got involved in this whole attitude. The first was the National Policy on Farmers, which is in your hands. It's on the back of the brochure. And in this, farmers were defined not by ownership of a piece of paper, but by the work that they do. And the original draft, which was made by Professor Swaminathan, said any person, comma, male or female, comma, who does the following things shall be called a farmer. But if you look at your brochure now, you will see that those three words, male or female, have been removed, because when Parliament passed the policy, it just said any person. I don't think it is proper for me to make any comments about Parliament, so I will not. Then, not satisfied with that, in 2013, when Professor Swaminathan was a member of the Rajya Sabha, he developed the draft bill on entitlements of women farmers, which is also in your hands in the brochure, and you can read it at leisure. And a large number of his contacts in the Rajya Sabha from all parties, including our present Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, had all promised their support. But unfortunately, both the occasions were disrupted due to some other matters not connected with this issue, and the bill could never be passed. So it has lapsed. Now if a bill has to come to Parliament, we have to start afresh. This is the situation in which we are today. Today you are going to hear from three speakers. The first will be Dr. Rukmini Rao, who is sitting on the left, right next to Professor Swaminathan. Among other things, she is a very active worker, and Jayashree will tell you soon what all she has done. But most significantly, she is the co-convener and the leader of the Women Farmers Network, which has representation from women farmers groups from about 13 states, and soon we hope to be covering all the states. And I'm happy to say that I'm also a member of this group. And she will be presenting the Charter of Demands, which has been developed by this group of women farmers from all over the country. Next, we will have comments from our very own Geeta Ramasheshan, whom many of you might have seen on her visits to the foundation, a very distinguished women lawyer. And she is going to analyze it from a legal perspective. What are the actual legal issues and problems that we will have to face when we try to get women these rights? What will we have to deal with? What are the legal problems? So I don't think we will have any success in this movement unless we get the full collaboration of distinguished lawyers like her, who will help us to avoid the many pitfalls and rocks in our path. And third, we would like to hear the responses and the comments of the chair of the National Commission for Women. I am fully convinced that she will support us, but we would like to know how and when and in what matter, and we will be very happy to cooperate and do whatever she requires us to do. And we would like to hear her responses. What we hope is that the National Commission for Women will prepare a model law for women's entitlements and circulate it to all the state governments. Because what the National Commission for Women has great impact and significance, because it speaks for all the women in the country, because ultimately the law, if it is to be passed, will have to be passed in each state. As you all know, agriculture is a state subject. And so we will have to go to all the 27 states we have now, Jayashri, 26 or 27 states. We'll have to go to each one of them. That we are ready. But if the leadership comes from the National Commission for Women, it will make our task much easier. So this is our hope, this is our dream, and this is why we are here today, to hear the views of all these people. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am, for giving us a very clear idea of not just today, but of possible steps that we can take in the days to come as well. To introduce very briefly Dr. Rukmini Rao, who has, as our Executive Director, and ma'am just said, is coming straight to us from an award for social impact that she has won, was also featured on the Week magazine's cover as Person of the Year for 2014. But there's a lot of work behind all this, and she started working on women's rights issues right from 1975, when she started protesting dowry deaths in Delhi along with a group of friends. So after being part of several groups campaigning against dowry in Delhi, she set up Saheli, a women's resource center in Delhi, and worked with the organization that she was founder member of till 1989. She's been part of campaigns that brought changes in the law related to rape, Section 498A, which for the first time recognized violence against women, and many other legislations, including law against pornography and sati. From 1990, she has worked with the Deccan Development Society in Medak for Dalit women and continues to support the organization. Since 1997, she's worked with the Gramya Resource Center for Women, preventing female infanticide, sex selection, and reducing violence against women in Nalgonda. She supports a number of organizations, Center for World Solidarity, Social Watch India Center for Sustainable Agriculture, and WASAN, provides gender training and consulting across the country. So as you can see, there's a lot that we would like to hear from her on, specifically related to women, and she has served on several government committees, including the 10th and 12th Planning Commission advisory groups. Thank you very much, ma'am, for making it here today. Straight from Mumbai, though it required rescheduling on your part, and we look forward to listen to you.
It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here with all of you. And I must say that I'm very happy to see the large number of young women who are here at the meeting. It's wonderful to see the next generation, and it's very encouraging to see that you're all here and that you will take forward your own dreams and you will share some of our dreams. Before I go on to talk about the Charter of Demands that we are in the process of developing, I would like to make a few general comments about what is impacting our agriculture. Now here we are, as Dr. Parita said in the morning, that we are working with the communities, we are doing participatory work, we are trying to develop ourselves right from the village, right from one tanda, one small hamlet, one small village in Orissa, and here and there. But what is impacting our agriculture policies? Is it only us and our women we are working with? The answer is no, as you all know. There are global forces at work which are pushing agriculture in a certain direction. And I think for us to move forward and to benefit from what we are doing, we must recognize this. There are anti-women forces, there are anti-poor forces, there are pro-capitalist forces, there are pro-big company forces which are strongly at work. Otherwise, we have to ask ourselves a question, why do we produce so much and farmers are perishing? I mean, we don't have a crisis of production. We are producing huge amounts of food. We have millions of tons of food grain, 10 million tons at the last count being eaten by rats every year. And what is happening in our country? I just went to Anantapur. As you all know, Anantapur is a district in Andhra Pradesh which has the lowest rainfall after Rajasthan. And I met a husband and wife, a small farmer who has less than 1 acre of land. And we have supported them through through Center for World Solidarity to improve their water sources. And that family, in half an acre, had grown 40,000 rupees worth of chilies in one season, and had grown bangan, tomato, this, that, and had made a profit of about 80,000 rupees with just having some water, little water with micro irrigation. So there was technology at work there. There was conservation of water in an area where actually villages are just emptying out. People are just moving to Bangalore because that's the closest city you can be. So we can see that there is a solution in our hands. But then how are we going to confront global forces? You would have seen yesterday's paper, I think, which said that there's a discussion in government, madam, whether we will allow lentils, dal, which all of us can grow, without actually putting any tax on it. They want to have free imports, remove the import taxation. So what will happen? We can't pay our farmers a decent price. This current government wants to dismantle, the price support system that farmers are getting. And then we find that we are importing dal from pigeon pea from Canada. So we really, the reason I'm placing this on board here is that unless we look at the politics of agriculture and what is happening in our society, we will continue to struggle with poor farmers, with women farmers. We will try to do something and we will never get anywhere. So I think as part of our own work in the future, politics have to be a part of it. And like you rightly said, the campaign that is now going on to conserve land rights, you said the men are marching in turbans. Where are the women? The second issue is, why are the women not out there? It's not that they don't want to be there, but the guy is at home, the bhais is at home, the 3 children are at home, so they are not able to come and they don't have the means to travel either. So the next thing we have to think about when we are talking about improving the situation of women in agriculture, to my mind, is gender politics. We keep on working 80%, and then who is starving in this country? 40% of all women in our country, as you all know, are malnourished. The farmer who is growing food and feeding not only our country, now we are exporting here and there everywhere. Now, we are feeding the rest of the world and ourselves, but the women are not able to eat enough. So how are we going to confront this? Gender politics. So I think when we are taking our work forward, when you go into the next village you're working in, please make sure that we look at the gender politics, we look at the land rights in the village, we look at the technology that we are importing or developing ourselves and how we are going to use it. I would like to come to one issue about technology. In the Center for World Solidarity, where I worked for many years, and I work as a managing trustee now, we had a project which I'm sure Professor Swaminathan knows about, the Red Hairy Caterpillar project. Red Hairy Caterpillar is a caterpillar which was affecting the pigeon pea. So they found a new technology which was to actually just burn rubber tires and have a lot of fires. So the insects would fall in it, and they found the technology. It was highly successful. That village actually had very high production, did very well, but the technology never spread. And no one understood why it's not spreading. It worked very well in one village, good results, lot of income for the farmers, but the next farmer did not adopt it at all. That was in 1986, 87, up to 19. Dr. Sanghi, who you might also know, he had worked very hard to do this, but he couldn't figure it out either. Then we switch forward to 1990s, and we in Andhra Pradesh, in the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, developed what we call the NPM methods, non-chemical approach to pest management, a little removed from IPM, where you're using partly chemicals and partly non-chemicals. But this approach, we said, no pesticide, no pest. That was a slogan that developed over years of work. And initially we worked with NGOs, and the NGO staff were trained, and then they went into the villages and used traditional, I won't call it traditional, I will call it post-modern, because there is this thing about romantic, about traditional, Purane Zamane ka. Nahi, this is not Purane Zamane ka. Yes, the knowledge and wisdom is Purane Zamane ka, but the application is very modern. So here, the NPM methods, different concoctions to be used for vegetables, for different kinds of crops were developed. And the upscaling took place through the self-help groups. And then the upscaling happened not because only NGOs decided to do it, but because the government of Andhra Pradesh came on board and saw, okay, this is producing very good results, so let us upscale. And as you know, Andhra Pradesh has been in the forefront of the self-help group movement. We have more than 1 million women across, all are poor, are in some self-help group. Every village has 20, 30 self-help groups, again formed into some kind of a federation at the district level. So we were able to transfer this knowledge, which came from scientists, very close learning, monitored for a few years, upscale across the state. And for the first time, the use of pesticide in AP has come down last year. And that actually is a result of technology and what, it's not a right word, but social interventions. You know, I won't call it social engineering because that has another kind of meaning, but social interventions. It was the women's group who decided, okay, we will do it. You know, everyone says women's work always increases whenever some new technology comes in, because this kashayam also means, I'm sure many of you are also using it, you know, pulping chilies, pulping garlic, doing this and that and that. So we overcame that by just giving small mixies, which people use in their kitchens. Instead of that, you use it for doing this. So very small interventions, and it was possible to upscale and bring down, because as you know, you may know, AP unfortunately used to use 50% of the pesticide in the country, I think. Huge amount of pesticide use. So that came down with the social engineering. So I want to summarize by saying that we have to look at global forces and see where we are going. We have to look at gender politics, and any intervention we do in agriculture, we have to see how we are going to ensure that women's involvement is there. I think it's only because women's involvement was there, we could make that leapfrog, use the technology to go forward very much. So this is the background in which Makam has come together. Makam is a group of actually now 16 states, Meenaji, who are involved in the organization. And these are basically activist women who are working in their own states, in their own villages with women farmers. Some are working with the agriculture labor, some are working with farmers, tenant farmers, owners, unpaid wives, farmers, whoever. So through this group, we actually try to gather the experiences of the groups working across the state. So I will not go into all the detailed charter of demands, but I would like to just flag off the main points. One, we salute Dr. Swaminathan for making that very broad definition of who a farmer is. I think for the first time in our country, we have recognized it's women farming land, it's fisher folk, it's agriculture labor, and it's people doing, forest dwellers, for example, who were completely forgotten. And as you know, forest dwellers are farming in the forest all the time. So this recognition, we decided that that is the recognition we want to take forward. And if we have to meet the challenges to make it work, to make the lot of women farmers better, this would be the best way to go forward across the country. Secondly, we felt that government has many schemes, hundreds of schemes, and fortunately this current government is thinking that we should converge or allow the states to develop their own mandates, which I think is excellent. But we are saying that we should pressurize the government state-wise, because agriculture unfortunately is a state subject. How do we ensure that we get convergence so that women farmers benefit from these 180 or I don't know 240 or 380 schemes that are going? So convergence is one other thing. Then thirdly, as we all know, the green revolution technology brought about fantastic changes in our country, but we have seemed to have reached our limits there. So we are saying and demanding that the government must now focus on rain-fed agriculture. And they must not, when we say rain-fed agriculture, we don't want the green revolution technology, more water, more pesticide, more blah, blah, blah to be used. But we are saying the government must really push for sustainable agriculture in dryland regions, because we believe as women and as activists that we have to work with nature rather than to work against nature. We don't want lychees to be grown in the hills when it needs hot weather, or go to rice growing areas and say we will grow pineapples, or I don't know what, kiwis, and all kinds of things are happening. Nalgonda district, where I come from, the government decided that they should have sweet limes, but the other day when I was going past on the highway, they were chopping down all the trees because the groundwater has gone, and so water stressed the area that fully grown trees were being cut down. So you end up in this kind of a situation. So we are saying let's work with nature and give high priority to rain-fed agriculture. The other thing is, we are aware, all of us are aware, that a very small farm is non-viable theoretically, but we also know that the FAO has come out with a study which shows that small farms are the most productive in the world, and they've documented it in hundreds of pages. So we are saying let small farmers come together as collectives and let them work together. And the government today is giving huge subsidies. I read an article which said that the biggest farming subsidies in Maharashtra were disbursed in Bombay city. Now, why would that happen? And I think more recently it's the same case in some other state. The agriculture subsidies are going to rich people living in cities who have imaginary farms somewhere, or they may be having some real farms, but that is what is going on. So we are saying that let government actually support women's collectives, let the government help institutional growth and development of these collectives, let the government help leadership development of the, because it's no use setting up an institution and saying all women and they can't count 1,000. And we know that many of our very good farmers are non-literate and they can manage their daily lives excellently, but when they have to deal with crores or tens of thousands of rupees, it's very difficult for them, and we expect good governance in institutions. So we are saying if we want good governance in our collectives, let government also support the process rather than to give the money only to the private sector, because we know that private sector is getting a lot of subsidies, for example in poultry. And we know that poultry, backyard poultry, 100% done by women. So we are suggesting some change, I think the government must show some willingness to support actual women's empowerment in the areas and fields that they are working in. Then, of course, we also have the whole question of water. The whole country is water stressed right now. But there are also many examples of water being generated, I'm putting that in quotes, actually water conservation methods are there, and we know that micro-irrigation has worked fantastically wherever it has been tried out scientifically and with proper technical support. So here once again we see technology coming to the aid, and we have to have social engineering to go along with that. And we have seen, I think all of us have that experience, that we can really go far and increase incomes exponentially by doing that. So what? Then of course, Meena ji already touched upon the whole question of financial inclusion. So I won't go into that. We need money. And we know that all farmers are taking loans at the beginning of the season and at the end of the season repaying the loans if they are lucky. If they are not lucky, they are committing suicide. So we are saying proper backup and financial inclusion should be made available to all women farmers as well as agricultural laborers. The other major challenge today is how is the administration related to land reforms, land management, land records being taken up in the different states. And here we find that very often there are no records maintained. You know, we were talking, one of our demands in the women's collective was that when a woman marries, her name should be entered in the pani along with her husband. Now, unfortunately, the husband also doesn't have his name in any pani. It's his grandfather who has his name in the pani. You know, because the land has never actually, the land has come into the hands of her husband, but the records have never been changed. So in this process, I'm sure you will talk about it, you're in deep trouble. Because we don't know. I mean, how are we going to ask for what the man says I don't have? And we see this very often in cases of divorce and, you know, quarrels over property. That they just say, it's not mine, it's my grandfather's or great-grandfather's. So we are saying that land administration must be improved. And to make that happen, we know it's all men sitting in all these government offices. All revenue offices will have 98% men, I think. I don't know, maybe even more. So we are saying if there are recruit women into land administration, recruit women into the agriculture extension process, and then wherever men are there, they must be sensitized. So we have some kind of gender sensitization process that should go on in each district. You must be thinking this seems to be a long wish list, huh? But I feel if we don't dream, we are never going to get there. So I think we have to really fight very hard for whatever we want. Then the last point I want to, I'm not today talking about forest lands and fishers. I mean, forest lands, we all know that people have rights. We already have the Forest Rights Act in place, but today the government is cheating communities. They are actually not giving the rights which they are entitled to. So our main demand is everybody's rights should be recorded. Where I come from, one part, they're planning to build a huge dam, Polavaram Dam, which is going to drown out 7 mandals, 7 units of administration, 100% with tribal communities, huge tribal communities. And if they don't record the rights, they're never going to get any compensation because it's a forest and it's not seen to be people's forest. Though people have been farming there forever, you know, it's indigenous people, it's their land, it's their forest, and they've always lived there. So now we are expecting the displacement of 200,000 or 300,000 people without a place for them to go to, because there is no scheduled area for them to be settled in, you know. They're finding one village with 10 families here and one village with 10 families there, which means people will completely lose their rights. So one is all the laws that are here in our country, we are demanding implementation of all the existing laws, and how we are going to get that implementation is a huge challenge. So I think like in Andhra Pradesh, we have the experience through the World Bank project. They trained paralegal workers, and they, particularly in the context of Dalit rights, because Dalit rights, there were lots of conflicts. You know, people have been given pattas, they don't know where the land is. People have land in their hands, they don't know where the paper is. So lots of issues like that. And the paralegal workers were able to go, discuss, find out, in some cases file a case, in some cases negotiate, and some thousands of acres of land has actually been released towards Dalits for their own rights. So we feel that some kind of paralegal community may need to be developed. We have the legal aid system, so how we can use the legal aid system is also something which we need to think about. So if we want to use the system, then women need legal literacy. So we have to think about the joining of, creating awareness among the community as well as then working with the system. So legal provisioning, I think, has become very, very important. Unfortunately, at our meeting, though we were expecting a large fishers community to come, they were not able to come. So I'm not placing their demands here, but please don't forget them, especially, I mean, here in Tamil Nadu also you have a very long coast like we have in Andhra, and we really need to think about what we can do. The last issue I want to talk about is livestock rearers. As you know, livestock and agriculture go hand in hand and make for very healthy agriculture. But today we are finding that in most villages the commons are disappearing. So what do we do? In Andhra it's land distribution. In Gujarat I have seen companies have just been given land. There was one village I went to where the Dalit Sarpanch fought the company and got 2 crores compensation because they had encroached on the panchayat land. And then they used it for making, growing fodder in their area. So we have to find new and innovative ways of keeping the commons that we have and also fighting for commons which we have lost. And I think which we are in the process of losing. I think we have to protect what we are in the process of losing. So I would like to conclude by saying that the struggle for land rights for women, it's not only about some women farmers or landless laborers out there. I think all of us here in this room have to become part of that struggle. I think we have to find ways and means in which we can support women farmers to stake their claim for land, to actually not only stake their claim. We are doing this by this Charter of Demands, but this is only a piece of paper like a constitution. You know, just like a constitution is a piece of paper, meaningless unless we get the rights implemented. I think women farmers' rights also are in our hands, not only in their hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for reiterating that each and every one of us need to be part of this struggle, and I hope this panel discussion will take forward some of the steps and actions that you have suggested, specifically towards implementation. To introduce our next speaker, Ms. Geeta Ramaseshan, as has been described already earlier, a friend of the foundation and a lawyer based in Chennai with more than 33 years of legal practice in criminal, constitutional, and family law, has worked extensively in cases related to discrimination, custodial violence, prisoners, juvenile children, sexual harassment, and rights of minorities, and persons living with HIV/AIDS. She's also challenged the constitutional validity of discriminatory laws and policies, has been part of many national campaigns for law reforms. As has been said, she also speaks and writes extensively in the media, sharing all this experience. She was Heinz Fellow in the University of Pittsburgh on Comparative Law and Eisenhower Fellow on Human Rights, Public Interest Litigation and Justice, an expert in international human rights law, has trained lawyers and judges of the Asia-Pacific region, serves as guest faculty at the National Judicial Academy, Bhopal, and on the faculty of the Asian College of Journalism next door, where she teaches media law. Most of all, as a friend of the foundation, she has guided and supported MSSRF, guides and supports MSSRF on gender and issues related to sexual harassment, and has helped draw up guidelines for the sexual harassment cell of MSSRF. Thank you, ma'am, for making yourself available, and we look forward to hearing you.
To be here, and I thank especially Mrs. Meena Swaminathan ji for having invited me to share with you a few of my concerns in this area. Now, after Dr. Rukmini Rao's presentation on this wide spectrum of concerns that have emerged, it is a little difficult for me to actually keep up and look at issues from a very narrow focus of law, which is in any event my specialty. And rather than look at larger land rights, of which there are few judgments that come into the purview, and which is a very complex area which looks at activism, policy, and so on and so forth, I thought I would share with you what are the major concerns in two areas pertaining to women's rights. One in the context of inheritance and the other in the context of livelihood. Looking at what the law exactly says, as well as what some of the judgments of the Supreme Court have said in this area. And so while we talk of law, of what the law is as a de jure position and what the failure of implementation is, which Dr. Rao pointed out, as a de facto position. Now, I'm not going to go into the de facto position now, because it's like, we know how difficult issues are there in terms of implementation and what the problems arise. And I think it's also important for us to actually look at the de facto position in a gathering of this nature and see how succession rights, to which law is linked to as far as inheritance is concerned, and then look at livelihood rights, to which how courts have actually addressed that within various spheres. Now, almost we know that laws of succession are based on one's own religion, and all the religious laws and all the personal laws are discriminatory in some form or the other. And if we were to actually take the issue of the Hindu Succession Act, which essentially deals with various kinds of properties. You have two kinds of properties there. One, which is the self-acquired property, which a person acquires in their lifetime, and the other which in law we call as the coparcenary property. Over and above this, there is a Hindu HUF property, a Hindu undivided property, which is partially coparcenary but is also used as an artificial structure for purposes of taxes and for purposes of various other instances, to which I will not go into. But in the context of succession, for those of you who want to actually look at what coparcenary is, or what people will say a joint family property is, basically it is defined as a property which is held together by 3 generations. That is your grandfather's property, grandson, etc. And most of the land is basically held as a coparcenary property. Like the example she gave, the property is actually in the name of the grandfather and it hasn't been transferred, which we say in law there is no mutation of records. That has not happened at all. And people continue to keep the property this way for various, it's just there in the name, you don't bother to check. As a matter of fact, even you wouldn't even see fences around lands. Which would just go into one or the other except for a narrow division. But now if you go towards Tanjore, etc., you see some kinds of fences have actually come towards boundaries. And people knew what their boundaries were without even, actually wanting to demarcate it in that sense. But in the context of coparcenary property, in a self-acquired property, again, with reference to both, you have 2 divisions, namely that there is a different set of rules when it comes to the inheritance for a male Hindu and when it comes to the inheritance of a female Hindu. And in the case of a male Hindu, we use the word class 1. There are various classes of heirs, There is a class 1 heir, there's a class 2 heir, there's a class 3 heir. We'll restrict ourselves to class 1 heir, which means that on the death of a male Hindu who dies intestate, that means who does not leave a will, the property first will come to the class 1 heir. And the class 1 heir for a broader framework includes the mother, the widow, the children. There are again grandchildren, etc. But without looking into that, if you look at the fact that for a male Hindu, the mother is a class 1 heir. There is no, the rights of the mother essentially definitely have to be taken note of, but you can see that the law itself gives a preference to the mother if there is a male son. Yeah? And though it's a 55 enactment, it's not to say that mothers should not get any inheritance from their sons' properties, but just to look at the fact that the importance is given to the son in the event of succession where a male, for a male Hindu. If you look at the rights of inheritance for a female Hindu, there are 3 categories of heirs. The first category, of course, is the husband and the children, or the grandchildren if one die. The class 2 heir actually are the in-laws, namely the husband's family. It's only in the absence of the husband's family will her own parents come into the process. Okay. There is, of course, there is, of course, a very proviso which say that in the case of a female Hindu, if she has no husband and she has no children, whatever property she got from her parents will go back to them, and whatever she has got from her in-laws can go back to her in-laws. But when it comes to her own self-acquired property, if she has no children and if she has no husband, chances are that the property will go to her husband's family. And there was a very recent judgment on this in the Supreme Court, where the woman was thrown out of her home in the 50s. She worked in the government. She had huge amounts of terminal benefits, and she was staying with her brother's children. And unfortunately, she did not write a will. And so, after her demise, the entire property went to the heirs of the family that had actually thrown her out in the first place. So we, as lawyers, we always advise women to write a will and keep. to at least get over this. But most women don't realize that this is how the succession can actually operate in the case of succession of a female Hindu. So there is this distinction that operates even for a normal inheritance of one's own self-acquired property. So now if you look at, and very interestingly, in law, in what we call as the General Clauses Act, the term masculine includes the feminine in all statutes. But in the case of the Hindu Succession Act, there is a particular provision which say that in this act, unless the context otherwise requires, words imparting the masculine gender shall not be taken to include females. To actually address the complexity, I would say, in 1956, when the Act came into existence, of the different schools of inheritance and problems that actually arise in various ways. Now, most of us here, we also know that Andhra Pradesh was the first law that made women co-parceners. Tamil Nadu gave it in 1989, Maharashtra and Karnataka in 1994. Then of course the central legislation came in 2005. But before I go into this, I just want to, for those of you who are not familiar with what the co-parcenary law is, it is like this. Prior to 1955, property held together by, let's say the family comprises of a grandfather, son and a grandson. Okay, they had the land. Now, if one male member died, the others would take over that land by what is called as the doctrine of survivorship. Okay, this was before 1955. So what would happen is that, supposing the joint family comprised of the grandfather, 2 sons, 1 grandson, each would be born as a male into this co-parcenary, and let's say each would have 1/4 share of let's say 1 acre. When one male member died, the other male members would get the remaining. So instead of 1/4, each would become 1/3. That was called the doctrine of survivorship. Okay, so that actually made the male member by birth as a co-parcener. By death, the structure of the co-parcenary would vary in different ways. Now, obviously, land was held that way at a different point of time. I'm not even going into the issue of patriarchy, etc., but this was how the law operated. Now, when the 1956 Act came into existence, it recognized the rights of the women in a very limited way, namely that if one co-parcener died, then his legal heirs, namely the mother and the other women, the widow or the children, would get that 1/4 share. Okay, so, and that share could also be left by way of a will. Now, therefore, the right then came only on death as inheritance. It was not a right that came by virtue of birth, which the male actually enjoyed. Now with the 2005 amendment, which is I think in many ways very, very late, because holdings are also shrinking. Large families don't have that kind of land, but nevertheless in many states it's very important to have this. But before I go to the 2005, I also want to share with you that when this limited law came into existence in 1956, many states like Uttar Pradesh exempted the provision of the Hindu Succession Act to agricultural land. Okay, because we know that agriculture is a state subject in the constitution. Succession and inheritance and family laws and other parts of it are both state and central. And when there is a central legislation, that takes precedence, the state legislations go away. So the large holdings still continue to be kept like that because there were various amendments to the law. In 2005, when this law came into existence, it has now given a daughter a right to be born as a co-parcener So now if the joint family comprises of a grandfather, 2 sons, 1 daughter and 1 son, the daughter will also be a co-parsoner, and therefore the entire corpus of the property will be 1/5. Okay? And the Andhra and the various state legislations earlier had a cutoff with reference to marriage, but the 2005 has done away with that, but has said that any Hindu who dies after the commencement in 2005, this particular act will apply. I mean, that's a little way of a pragmatic approach, in the sense that, you can't really open out partitions that took place 30, 40 years ago. There has to be a quietus given to various litigations, but now after 2005, this is the way inheritance process works. So here again, it's only the daughter who becomes a co-parsoner. The wife or the widow, the mother, would still be only a legal heir in the event of death of the male Hindu. And in the case of the daughter who is a co-parsoner, since the succession rules is different for both the men and women, the only one issue where the law says whatever you have inherited from your parents can go back to them, the subsection 3 would be an area where this could be taken note of. So now, and also a Hindu can leave the entire property to anyone by way of a will. And we know for a fact that children can often get disinherited, daughters can often get disinherited. So this is how the succession law actually operates with reference to the Hindu Succession Act. Now, if you were to take Muslim law, and there are huge, and especially in Uttar Pradesh, we half of what the son gets. In Muslim law, the percentage of inheritance share is proportionately fixed. It's half and 1/4, 1/8, and then there is a huge different category of various kinds of family members who can also inherit in the context. But the positive element in Islamic law is that you cannot leave more than 1/3 of your property as a will. You can only will away 1/3 of your property. The remaining 2/3 of the property has to be divided among the various heirs. Now, this says, the leaving the property absolutely and leaving it proportionately has its own, in some situations it is very good. In some situations, people feel, in the case of nucleus families, I can leave away only 1/3 to my children and wife, and some distant relatives can come through. So but the distinction in terms of inheritance is something that we actually need to know as to how succession law and inheritance law operates in India. It is far more complex than what most people understand, and its actual de facto position at the ground level is people negotiate, manipulate, and work through this in various ways. That's the only way one can actually address this issue in more ways than one. And to look at livelihood issues, and to look at rights of women in land, of those who are no more, who are not owners of the land, I just want to discuss with you one case called Madhu Kishwar versus State of Bihar. Madhu Kishwar, she challenged the constitutional validity of the Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act of 1908 that was operative in many parts of undivided Bihar, etc., and the Chota Nagpur Plateau, and looked at the rights of the Ho community, tribal women who had no right of inheritance over the property, similar to what we have been discussing together when they toiled and cultivated the entire land for the entire purpose. Of course, the case challenged it on a different notion, namely that the Hindu Succession Act should apply because it gives rights to women. And of course, being tribes who are protected within the constitutional framework of law, the Supreme Court did not accept the argument put forth by her lawyer. And it's a very interesting judgment because it's a 3-member judgment, of which the minority view holds that the women should get the right of inheritance, because the minority view holds that if you wait for parliament, if you wait for the legislature to pass a law, it will never come into being. And I just wish to quote the majority view in this regard. However much we may like the law to be, we regret our inability to subscribe to the means in achieving such objective. If this be the route of return on the courts entering into the thicket, it is better to keep out of it. Rules of succession are indeed susceptible to providing differential treatment, not necessarily equal. Non-uniformities would not in any event violate Article 14, which is Equality Clause of the Constitution. Judge-made amendments to allow would not be something that is permissible in this case. But then ultimately what the court did was that it looked at livelihood as an issue in this case and held that livelihood as an issue is guaranteed under Article 21. And so even though the women cannot become the absolute owners or succeed to the estate because of the special protection that they got as a tribal community, it held that the immediate female relatives of the last male tenant have the constitutional remedy to stay on holding the land so long as they remain dependent on it for earning a livelihood, for otherwise it would render them destitute. So it permitted what in law we call as usufructuary rights, namely the right to cultivate the land and to enjoy the proceeds and to use it as a livelihood, rather than give them the rights that the substantive law gave in terms of giving them a right of inheritance equal to that of a male. So in a way the court balanced this approach, it has been critiqued in various ways, but to my mind imposing the Hindu Succession Act to tribal communities is not the right way, much as the Hindu Succession Act itself is fraught with a lot of problems. I mean, if you were to take Kerala, for example, that had a very different kind of inheritance, where women, the line of succession of inheritance came through the female. In 1976, Government of Kerala abolished the joint family system of Kerala, as a result of which the Hindu Succession Act, with its Mitakshara doctrine, it applies in Kerala in various ways. But a lot of people who are actually living in Nagarkoil do not follow the principles of the Hindu Succession Act, but continue to divide their property based on the Tarwad and various other laws in terms of what Kerala follows. So this balance is something that I think the Supreme Court did when it looked at the rights of livelihood of women. And I think that's the area from which we can develop more other rights, considering the fact that not many people anyway inherit land, and we don't have that many landowners, but livelihood is a far more focal point for most people. And since the court has held that livelihood is a right guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution, that inclusive of the right to life, this is something that one needs to take note of. I just wanted to share these aspects with you and just conclude on one point, namely that, on 2 points. One is that, in the context of the bill, Dr. Swaminathan, there's a reference to CEDAW and CRC. What the Supreme Court has given in a judgment is that, with reference to CEDAW in Vishaka's case, where they held that Vishaka case, which related to laying down the principles of sexual harassment, where they have held that if India is a signatory to any of these international treaties, then in the absence of any legislation that does not address that particular issue, the principles in the international treaties can be read into domestic law. But matters pertaining to the family are governed under Article 16 of CEDAW. And with reference to Article 16, Government of India has not completely ratified that article, but has given a declaration saying that till such time the changes are coming from various communities, they will not oblige themselves to any change with reference to Article 16. So there's this complex area in terms of what changes can be done with reference to CEDAW. And so even the general principles which we quote always for other provisions like sexual harassment or right to employment, etc., can't really be, we're trying to address that in the context of property and in the context of land or in the context of inheritance, but becomes more difficult with the kind of declaration that the Government of India has adopted. And the last point that I actually want to stress, which Dr. Rao you had made, pertaining to how do we translate the de jure, existing de jure rights into a de facto position. I mean, how do we look at legal aid? Yes, there is now legal aid is mandatory, but unfortunately the system doesn't work the way it does. It looks at lok adalats, it looks at various other disputes which are just very systemic in its approach. But then it needs to be pushed. You know, in Tamil Nadu we had a very vibrant legal aid movement much before the new act came into existence, where we pushed the boundaries of how legal access can be made. And one way of looking at this would be to look at what is the appropriate mode of resolving the dispute. You know, people talk of ADR today. Supreme Court says the alternate dispute resolution. I do not like the word alternate because that's pitting one system as against the other. I think what we need to look at is what is the appropriate dispute resolution. Look at ADR that way. Whether coming to court is important or whether you can resolve it, take the help of paralegals, as you say, take the help of senior lawyers who can actually nurture the paralegals in more way than one to look into the rights in a various way, in strengthening that momentum, because that is something which is also very lacking in our system, that kind of nurturing that we do to larger human rights issues, etc. And somehow or the other, we will have to push that if we are going to address this within the legal framework, not necessarily within the legal framework, but also to look at assertion of rights. So I once again thank the Foundation for having given me this opportunity of sharing a few of my thoughts on this issue with you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for giving us a lot of insight into various laws, including those of inheritance, and also how international conventions to which we are a party are significant in the absence of existing legal provisions here. Before I call upon our lead speaker, Dr. Rukmini had a small present she wanted to hand over to. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. To introduce our lead speaker, who actually needs no introduction, but as a formality, who she's taken over as chairperson of the National Commission for Women, and we've been seeing a number of requests being made to her for the past couple of hours. Belonging to an illustrious political family, her background of governors, cabinet ministers, members of parliament. She's a prominent political leader in her own right, a prominent woman political leader in her own right, who has been working for the empowerment and advancement of women from vulnerable and underprivileged sections of society for most of her life. She has worked on issues dealing with healthcare, HIV/AIDS prevention, disempowered communities like sex workers, truckers, LGBT communities, migrant and construction workers, and urban slum women. Her varied experiences as a political and social activist have been providing the leadership to women's empowerment and the Commission over the past few months. And as a person who is versatile and with this kind of background, there are a lot more expectations ahead. But ma'am, we look forward to hearing you speak at this discussion.
Dr. Swaminathan, Meena auntie, friends, and everybody else who has the patience to listen to me, good afternoon. Actually, I think I'm going to be on big flop today, because after hearing two such learned and speakers who know the topic so much more better than I do, I really wonder what is there left for me to add to the discussion. I have worked for the better part of 25 years with people from the grassroots. So I very firmly believe in the strength of the grassroots, which is why Geeta and I over the years have had many very fruitful and interesting discussions on various issues, and I'm equally glad to meet Dr. Rao, of course. I will speak from the perspective of having taken over 6 months ago as the chairperson of the National Commission for Women. Now, unfortunately, most of our mandate deals with the problems that women face, especially with regard to violence. And in today's, I don't mean today, this discussion here, but social discussions, etc., which are held, whether in the government or in bureaucracy, political circles, etc., the landscape of violence against women is almost always restricted merely to physical violence. The various other forms of violence that are practiced daily, whether it is with regard to property, whether it's with regard to life and liberty, whether it's with regard to education, nutrition, I mean, there is an endless list, are never looked at as violence. That is just looked at as patriarchy, which continues to keep women under the thumb of men, to put it in a very simple way. For many years now, I have been trying to argue, especially in the political landscape, which is very reluctant to accept this, that violence against women is perpetrated not only physically. Apart from the emotional and other forms of violence, one of the biggest forms of, according to me, violence against women is the lack of financial rights they have. In this case, by financial, I also mean property. Fortunately, I come from a family where I had a father who was a very well-known lawyer, and one of the first things I remember him teaching me was that never sign anything without reading it through. So I still have that. And he used to say, even if I tell you to do it, read it. First read it, then sign it. So there are several these are things that are never taught to women in India, even today. And there was never really much discussion about property in my family, because my father was sensible enough to leave a will. So we all got what and he was fairly, sort of quite even-minded. My sister and I got, except for the HUF property, which at that time there was still, it went to the men. The rest of it, we were given our own share of it, a fair share. But even today, when you talk to many of the problems that come up before me are to do with property, and some of the most shocking things I have seen are to do with the transfer of property within families. One of the most famous media people in this country, whose name obviously I can't mention, had their own daughter declared mad, because that particular child had inherited most of her property from her mother, and the mother had passed away. And she was almost institutionalized so that her property could be legally transferred back to her father. I think many people here may know who I'm talking about, but I can't mention names. This is a form of violence that's perpetrated against women. Of course, on a daily basis, I'm dealing with the most heinous cases of rape and stuff like that. But one of the reasons why women continue to be raped in many ways, not just the physical way, is because of their lack of control over finance, over property. It's been proved statistically, and I'm not going to, come out with the statistics here, because there are different statistics across the country and in different parts of the world, that ownership of property does decrease violence against women. It's a fact. It's not just empowerment and making women stand on their own feet. If you have actually been trained, educated, skilled, etc., and are working, and the money that you earned is not really in your own control, then that's really not empowerment at all. Many women still face this across the board. It has nothing to do with religion or caste or the state of society you come from or how rich or how poor your family is. In fact, I have seen in many cases the poorer families, the economically less well-off families, often are more democratic when it comes to women's rights. Whether it's to do with caste or religion, often the families who are socially more, let me say, well endowed, are extremely patriarchal in their attitude towards women's property rights. Whether it's land, whether it's jewelry, whether it's houses or, you know, whatever else. I have also seen that women hardly know their rights. Where they do know their rights, they are often emotionally blackmailed into saying that, you know, after all, you're a member of the family, without you, how will we last, etc., etc. And they very stupidly sign away their own rights to properties. Many times they have regretted it and then come back and said, what can we do? But you know, the law is I think it's a living thing only up to an extent. Partly it's a very static thing. Once you have given away your rights, it's a very long, painful process to try and get any of them back. More often than not, I have seen the most educated and women belonging to the so-called elite classes, they don't know what their property rights are. They don't even know their own civil liberty rights, aside from property, etc., and financial rights. Also, despite the inclusiveness today that is being extended to the general woman with regard to access to finance and skills development, which is also includes the management of the finance that they have access to, women are still generally left out of the entire picture. Even the Jan Dhan thing, which is the program that was introduced recently, which has resulted in a huge number of accounts being opened by women who don't perhaps have Aadhaar cards or passports or voter ID cards, etc. Even there, you will find that very often, because women don't know actually how to sign, you will find that if they're just putting a thumbprint or something like that, they're often being told to bring somebody else who actually can sign. It's not necessary. But because women don't know that, it's still happening. And again, it's not just, perhaps in the big metros it's less, but it's not as if it doesn't happen in semi-urban areas. And we've had a lot of complaints over the quarrels within families, domestic violence, reports of domestic violence, because women have actually asked saying, but isn't that my money? Why should I have to share it with anybody else? They get bashed up. The figures, of course, about the amount of work that women do worldwide, whether it's in agriculture or even in other areas, Meena Mami has already given those figures. They're roughly about 75 to 80% of the work is done by women, but worldwide less than 10% of assets are owned. I think in India it may be about 13 to 15, but worldwide it's less than 10% of assets that are owned by women. And again, this is not just to do with the poorer sections of society, this is across the board. One of the things I have seen, this is not just over the last 6 months, but over the last 20 years, is that the whole concept of patriarchy is not promoted just by men. There are an equal number of women who support patriarchy, whatever may be the reasons behind it. Which is, sometimes I'm told I sound very leftist, or sometimes I'm told I sound very rightist. But at the moment, I hope I just sound feminist, because the fact is that lack of ownership of any sort of asset, which includes even the right to education, has held women back in many ways. When we talk about nutrition, it's a little known fact that the first 2 years of any child's life is when their brain develops the most. And it's in the first 2 years of any human being's, right, of any child's life, that I think girls get the least nutrition they deserve. So obviously it's going to have an effect on their brains. So when people say that, but you know, girls are not as bright as boys, which anyway I don't believe, nobody looks at the reasons behind it. I think I'm meandering too much. Let me come back to the topic at hand. I also want to talk about how perhaps we could make property rights for women farmers and eventually women working in tribal areas and in fisheries, etc. What are the ways in which we can sell them politically? First, we need to make it a financial argument for us. We need to be able to tell the politicians that, especially with the current government's Look East policy, which means look at the eastern states of India, a lot of whom have coastlines, so fisheries would come under it. Also the non-timber forest products, which people don't even know what they mean. But you have two huge empires in India that are built on it, the Daburs and Baba Ramdev. Most of their money comes from these two sectors. And when the Prime Minister talks about Make in India, it should include agricultural products. We are mainly talking here about industrial products, but the day we say that agricultural products make sense, and this is why it makes sense, and the other equally important argument here is the voting patterns. Any politician worth their salt wants to be in power, and you come to power when people vote for you. So women form 48.5 something percent of this country's population, and about the same number, same percentage in terms of voters. An increasing percentage of women come out and vote today, even in the rural areas. They know they have a right to vote. Unfortunately, the political system has been corrupted to the extent where votes are bought. But you will find that a lot of women may take the money and then vote where they know their personal liberty or their personal gains lie. And if politicians understand this, and any politician worth their salt will understand this, the fact that if you can give women rights, ownership rights of their own property, and thereby help them to stand on their own feet, and thereby escape all the sorts of violence that they may face, and help them to gain autonomy, you will get their vote. Especially in the rural and especially in the urban areas, but increasingly in the rural areas, and that is where the women farmers or women agricultural labor actually work, in the rural areas. These are the arguments that also should be used. For example, in the Charter of Demands, please include the economic and the political arguments, because that's the way, as a politician, I can tell you very bluntly, that's how you will actually sell it to even patriarchal societies. As you know, and would probably have heard from the very frequent and, for want of a better word, very foolish statements made by many senior male politicians, patriarchy is still very embedded in the political system and in the social system in this country. It's not going to go without kicking and screaming very loudly, which it is doing at the moment. But equally inevitable is the acceptance, reluctant at best I would say, that women are coming of age, whether it's in the examination results, whether it's in the responsibility showed toward their families, whether it's the capacity to multitask both at home and at office. Increasingly women's abilities are, people are being forced to recognize it. And like I say, it's not without an enormous amount of reluctance. Every day I ask questions which I refuse to answer because any reply I give becomes too controversial, even if it's true, in fact, especially if it's true. So nowadays I run from the press. I made a statement about legalization of sex work, and that blew into a huge controversy because the context in which I spoke was just not looked at. Similarly, I'm afraid that, this effort that we are wanting to support today, and I'm very serious about my support in this, will also, I'm afraid it should not, I hope it isn't taken out of context. I would also like to say there are some things I want to support. Dr. Rao mentioned that women needed to be recruited into agricultural administration. I would also say into planning on any agricultural, because we have very few women even in urban planning, forget about rural planning. I don't even know if rural planning is a separate subject in the government. state plan, no, I'm not just talking about urban planning, yes, it's at least now something that's considered very important for growth. But rural planning, I don't know if it's... okay. Women don't have the expertise also and they're left out. Yeah. Okay, but in which case we need to talk about skilling, because there is this huge program that's going to be now pushed by the government of India. It's already started to be pushed. And we need to talk about also again the financial advantages of skilling women in agriculture. Productivity increases, which would help us to be less dependent on imports. Of course, the import lobbies and WTO, whatever it is, will do their own lobbying. But I think if we can combine, the fact that a particular political party's support of this will increase their popularity, especially in the rural areas, combined with the fact that financially it's also advantageous for the national economy, it should be easier for us to push this. I have started telling a lot of people that when you work with women, stop looking at it merely as corporate social responsibility. We need to be able to tell people that we already contribute, and financially investing in women, whatever way it is, it pays. Its advantages, it's actually profitable. I was talking to somebody who works for Baba Ramdev. Actually, that's how I found out what a huge empire he has, and that deals almost entirely with NTFPs. I didn't know what a non-timber forest product was till about 6 months ago. My daughter started work in Delhi in an NGO that works with bamboo, and that's how I learnt about it. Now, I like working at the grassroots level. I've always liked it. So I asked for information, and I got an enormous amount of information that I tried to read through, and I learnt a little bit. And then I realized that the amount of non-timber forest product this country has, and the fact that bamboo is there in every state in this country. One presumes bamboo is only in the hills. But apparently India has the largest number of types of bamboo in the world. And how different cane is from bamboo. I really didn't know much. And I won't bore you by trying to impress you with how much I know now, because I don't know that much. But the fact that again it's women who collect all non-timber, work with almost all non-timber forest products. Whether it's bamboo, whether it's cane, whether it's wild mushrooms, whether it's wild flowers, whether it's roots and fruits and berries and everything else, leaves, etc., collected. Whether all the fancy cosmetics that are made both in other countries and within India, the biggest brands, most of that stuff is collected and processed by women, again throughout the world. But since we are talking about India, wouldn't it pay to equip those women with better skills? Wouldn't it pay to invest in their being able to do this work in a more sustainable manner? These are the arguments that we must learn to push. In many of the so-called think tanks that are now being formed, and unfortunately often the so-called left and the so-called right are at loggerheads with each other, but wherever they do meet, I've tried to start to talk about the fact that women are not merely corporate social responsibility. We can hold our own everywhere we go. And I'm not talking merely about education versus, look at even the women who work in the service sector. There's a huge percentage of women. And often they are always given the less skilled job. Whereas the fact is that we are far more skilled with our hands. I don't know if it's genetic or it's just years and years of centuries and millennium of training or whatever it is. But we are more skilled in handwork. And much of today's value-added products have to do with delicate work which many machines just can't do. So wherever it is a more labor-oriented work that has to do with hands, it's again women. And a large amount of that work is in agriculture, in fisheries, in what is called NTFPs, and in many other small, cottage industries, for example, that take place in the country. But since we are talking again more about women in agriculture, there is another effort that's starting. I think the World Bank has started talking to the Government of India on the formation of agricultural clusters. much along what they say has worked very well in some of the Southeast Asian countries and in China. Again, I see very few women in that discussion. Because I'm the head of the NCW and have a fair degree of education, I'm able to perhaps understand these issues and contribute a bit, but I don't know enough to be the real expert voice on those panels. So hopefully the National Commission of Women will be allowed to appoint interlocutors in every state. These will really be more in the form of advisors. And I will be looking at experts from various fields for this. Again, I will not be looking merely at politicians. In fact, most probably I will be trying to get real experts from various fields who could help us, because planning and policy is where I think we can make our maximum impact. Dealing with helping women to get over violence that is perpetrated against them is at best short term. The long-term results, the long-term work will have to be policy based. Otherwise, the amount of violence against women that is even, I would say, sort of almost systemic in India, I'm afraid will never decrease. Or may at best decrease very, very marginally. Just, not in a sustainable manner at all. The thing is that over the years, women have been told and women have been almost taught not to demand their rights. We are called aggressive, we are called many negative terms are used. But that is now slowly, as public policy or public debate has opened up to the many aspects in which women are made subservient or continue to be held in second place, slowly that is going down. So my advice to any woman who's afraid to look too aggressive, just don't be afraid. It's all right. Now it's accepted that there are very, very many aggressive women in politics today, and we've managed, we've survived. So therefore I would say that one of the things that will be very useful is in getting the collectives of women's self-help groups. Some states have got a lot of work done, and when I went to visited the Northeast, I went to Mizoram, Manipur, Nagaland and Arunachal Pradesh, I found that they are very fractured in the sense that the self-help groups, the concept is beginning to be understood and they do work collectively, but theirs is not a collective voice. They don't demand things collectively. So there is always strength in numbers. And perhaps your cooperative could, your collective, I don't know what you wish to call it, but Makam, for want of a better word, can ensure that this is, that you keep your flock united in this demand. Because eventually they will be consulted or asked, and it's very, very important. Please also teach the women to say that we will support you if you support us. Indians are very afraid to come out so openly, and we are too genteel in many times. But I think the time for that is gone now. So to be crude, rude, blunt, whatever word you want to use, be as aggressive as you can, and demand, saying that look, this is also could well be a case of quid pro quo. Politicians understand that. More than this, I think, I really shouldn't go on and on, because I've taken up quite a lot of time, and I think I still need to learn an enormous amount. I'm willing to, and I'm very keen to support this, because part of my own personal advantages have been that I was never held back from a good education. Whatever I could achieve in terms of any work that I have done is largely due to the foundation that was given by everybody in my family, to everybody, and never denied to me. I'm very lucky in that I was never told that this is not your property. It was never argued. There were enough men in my family who were extremely powerful, but fortunately they were well trained, whether it's my father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, whatever, everybody. So I was very fortunate to have access to that sort of equality. My sister and I were never told in any way that you're in any way less than your brother. And he used to say that I'm, sandwiched between these two women. And well, I mean, he was a wonderful chap, but it was never that he had more rights than we did especially within the family. And I'm not talking about the personal things. I'm talking about financially, access to education, access to nutrition, etc. The other thing that I want to say is that not only will I try and support this as much as possible, I would be very grateful if you all would help me also to carry this agenda through, because I can't do it alone. I need people who know much more than I do about what we're talking about, especially today. And my last request is, please don't politicize it. What happens in today's political milieu is that it starts off as an issue and then it becomes left versus right. It becomes one religion versus another, one caste versus another, and that really weakens the issue. Many times I have said that if we can stick to the issues, whether it's financial, whether it's economic, whether it's something else, if we don't politicize it, it's much easier to get our issue on the table and to get it pushed through. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm very, very happy to have been here.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your comments on women coming of age, and especially in the context of placing ourselves on the planning and policy table. I'd now like to request our respected professor to speak a few words and to moderate the discussion. When Mrs. Swaminathan was forming the panel, she was particular it has to be an all-women panel. But she said, Professor is more feminist than any of us. And he has been consistently talking about the pro-women approach in every talk at every forum. So we look forward to your guidance, sir.
Thank you, Jayashree. I think all our three panelists and Lalita have a wonderful summing up. I don't think I need sum up what they have said. We will have a few minutes for questions. Before that, they have come to interview you, I think. It will take a little more time, so please, 10 minutes more. So they want to ask you questions. I think one thing for all the panelists have, and also opportunities for women farmers, whether it is credit, whether it is water, whether it is technology, whether it is market. I think that is a fundamental right which should be there. And what I would request Lalita ji is, at least in the case of those who can make a beginning, in the case of farmers who commit suicide and so on, it must become mandatory that the land goes to the widow. Otherwise, she is, again, that even if it's taken away by the father-in-law or brother-in-law and so on, the rights are very bad. So, because we try to sympathize with such families, give a cow and so on. But even as you said, livestock and livelihoods are very closely related. But then for the cow also we require feeding and so on. So I think we should make a beginning somewhere. The right to land, and Beena Agarwal pointed it out also in her book, very famous book, Field of One's Own, how many opportunities it opens. And also the area of nutrition. For example, we have a program here called Farming Systems for Nutrition. But women, if they have the control over the land, then they could grow those crops which are more, even in Africa, where the men farmers grow the cash crops, and the women grow the food crops. But then the food crops are also sometimes converted to cash crops because for the money, they say. So I would say the right to land, we should not. One thing which you mentioned about SIDA, the reason why my private member's bill was admitted was because of SIDA. Otherwise, there was an objection. It had to go to the president, and they said this is an international convention for no discrimination against women. Yeah. And on that clause, they admitted that particular bill itself. Of course, it didn't go through the private member's bill. Private member's bill doesn't get the aid. Now, the technological empowerment, I think, is another very important one, because the whole research agenda should have to be also engendered. For example, agricultural machinery. machines and so on. They have to be engendered. We found in Kolli Hills the large number of local millets, shamai, thinai, panivarai, which are very nutritious. They're all being given up. One of the reasons was they had, the British called it coarse cereals. They were hand pounding. And once the machine came, then they started again revival of interest. Now, Krishi Vigyan Kendra, when I set it up, well, two of the first Krishi Vigyan Kendras, is, apart from one in Pondicherry, one was at Indore, in the Kasturba Gram at Indore, only for women alone. Another was Nagaland, which was at Mokokchung, which was set up. I think we should, while we talk about women farmers' rights, the right to technology, the right to reduction in drudgery, organizations like ICR, the Indian Council of Agriculture, the Women's Commission can pressurize them. Have we engendered your programs of so a lot of things can be done, and the Krishi Vigyan Kendras, you can ask them how many are really intended for women-specific occupations, because you rightly said it is not only crops but farm animals and also fisheries. Those people also need attention. Now, I think, Lalitaji, you made an important point that social political empowerment is equally important for women. If you want to get anything done, that is clear even panchayats, wherever women sarpanchas are there. The agenda is somewhat different. The agenda, in fact, Rita Sareen has documented it very well. The one-third reservation of women in parliament and state legislatures, I was one of those who voted for in the Rajya Sabha. It was a very tumultuous day anyway, but now that your party has the majority in Lok Sabha, I would say it should not now be further delayed. It can easily be, because Rajya Sabha has already passed it, and the bills passed by Rajya Sabha do not lapse, unlike Lok Sabha. Lok Sabha bills lapse. So there is a great opportunity today to complete the process, and the Lok Sabha also adopts, and that makes a lot of difference. The empowerment, political empowerment, makes a lot of difference. Even if you want to bring a bill, unless you've got the numbers, as they say, you'll have to do it. Now, malnutrition, these are really serious problems, but I think we should give a little opportunity for any member here. Anyone would like to ask a question or a comment to any of the three of them? This is the time. Anyone?
Nobody wants to ask a question? And not the press.
Is there
Make a comment?
any comment or question? Please. She's our trustee.
Thank you very much. I think it was stimulating this hearing with three of you. I think an important thing that has to accompany this whole journey of not only ensuring rights but facilitating empowerment of women is the whole literacy that has to accompany it. And here I think not just women, but I think the engendering process is very important, that every sector, every leader has to ask for this, and there should be a pull factor asking. And I think with the National Council of Women, while a lot of times you're in the headlines when violations have happened, they look at you immediately and say, what are you doing? Could there be also a mood now, since significant numbers of women are moving into the workforce, are moving into leadership positions, could there be also a sort of a look forward saying, can we ask for this? Can we choose 3 or 4 sectors and say, can we ask for leaders to look as to how they're facilitating? The second thing also I think, and as Meenaji commented, a lot of young professionals are here, is to keep reminding, and that's where I really enjoyed your presentation, is to keep reminding young women today who are sometimes trapped saying my success is my success, but young women today to also become fellow mentors and supporters, while I think the protest is gaining recognition in India. It's not so much kind of put in the periphery. If protest can be accompanied also by the understanding that we have to reach out more, that the journey is not complete, these statistics will continue to be so if we don't reach out. So maybe again to professionals like you in the legal field is to be able to reach out in a way that can even be mainstreamed into higher education. We speak of many things, a legal literacy piece, where men and women know what's the new legal climate, what it does. I mean, not just women giving up their rights, but women feeling guilty for asking a share in their parents' property. that the brothers are not doing well, so I should give away my share. I think this set of thing also should be there. And within, I'm very pleased to tell you that within MSSRF there is a process now to see how we can understand more deeply the impact, the gender impact of our work, and also to see from the conceptual stage, Mrs. Meena Swaminathan is leading us in this, how can we place the whole sort of gender framework into our work. So to both of you, I think National Council of Women, it would be wonderful for us to hear this proactive role in asking spaces to look for including, I think, the right to livelihood, but also from experts to remind younger women who come in that there is more to be done to this. But really enjoyed this dialogue.
You met her father, Aram, Dr. Aram, who is Gambian, who is in Nagaland for a long time. Any other comment or question? Anybody else? If not, I think the media want to interview her. So, Rangalakshmi, will you propose a vote of thanks, and then they can, the cameraman can come to her.
Thanks on this wonderful day. And I'd like to start by thanking you all for attending this important event, that is land rights for women, and it has been subject for last 5 years in the foundation. We keep discussing on it, how we can address or how we can get involved in this issue. And at the outset, on the behalf of foundation, I would like to express our gratitude to Srimati Lalita Kumaramangalam, Chairperson, National Commission for Women, Government of India, for sparing her valuable time to address the gathering and for highlighting the issues associated with the property rights and women's empowerment. And in the speech, she highlighted the need for adopting the multidisciplinary or multi-pronged strategy to address the issue as a collective. Ma'am, we assure you that we will support you in the process to take the issue forward. And also, I'd like to place on record the excellent contribution made by Dr. Rukmani Rao, Gramia Foundation, as well as the co-convener of Makam Forum, and Ms. Geeta Ramaseshan for providing the detailed account of the legal issues associated with the property rights under different religious context in India. And most importantly, I'd like to express our sense of gratitude to Professor, who have been instrumental in practicing the women's empowerment and gender equality in his own life as well as work, and instrumental in drafting the Women's Entitlement Bill. And I convey my thanks to the print and electronic media for the efforts they are taking for coverage of this event, and the caterers for refreshment. And finally, I thank all my colleagues who are associated with me in organizing this event. And special thanks goes to IEC section, who have been helping us in web streaming the event, as well as audio recording the conversations. And thank you all once again, and we look forward for your continuous cooperation and support in taking the issue forward. Thank you.